Well, the Alabama Senate has thrown down the gauntlet, Scott, passing the nation's most restrictive anti abortion bill, criminalizing the procedures of felony. And what's most audacious about the law, even beyond the fact that it was passed by the heavily Republican state Senate in Alabama, Scott, is that they admitted openly that the law is designed to make it to the Supreme Court, or the case that is certainly going to be built against it, designed to go all the way to the Supreme Court in an attempt to overturn Roe versus Wade. So let me ask you this. How does the court generally react to cases involving laws that are designed specifically to bring a case before the Supreme Court?
Tim, this is indeed the audacity of hope of the Alabama legislature to outlaw abortion. This is many states have now passed what are called these heartbeat bills, and they focus on the healthcare, quote unquote, healthcare provider side, which is to say they criminalize the behavior not of women who seek abortions, but of healthcare providers who perform them. Tim, the Supreme Court is used to seeing cases brought for the sole purpose of changing the law and changing the constitutional judgment of the court. That's how many major issues of our day are decided, by engineered cases brought for not the purpose of necessarily litigating the party's interests, but on moving the law. For instance, the Heller case was brought by a group of gun control opponents, chiefly Bob Levy, then of the Cato Institute, and they engineered a case to go to the Supreme Court because they thought that the court was ripe for making this type of change. And that is exactly what's motivating the proponents behind this Alabama bill, Tim, and also the other quote unquote heartbeat bills that are being passed and considered in other legislatures in conservative states around the country.
Now, the way this bill is designed is basically to force the opposition to sue, take it to court, and make its way up from the district to circuit to appellate to Supreme Court level. But once it gets there, yes, Scott, there is certainly a conservative majority ideologically. But if you look at a guy like Kavanaugh, maybe not so much Gorsuch, but certainly John Roberts, is this a group of a narrow majority of 5 conservative justices prone to overturn longstanding precedent like Roe versus Wade? I mean, John Roberts' decision on Obamacare, where he cast the vote that single-handedly upheld the law, does that not prove that he, at least, if not the other so-called conservative or constitutionalist justices, are loath to overturn longstanding precedent?
I don't think that you can extrapolate from the Obamacare ruling what may happen here. I think it's fair to say that we know for sure John Roberts isn't a sort of dyed-in-the-wool conservative's dream of a justice. But I don't think that we can then say this is indicative of how he's going to rule in this case. And I would say to you, Tim, that the people who are putting their massive political capital and money behind this push, they've done their counting and they see 5 votes for a win on the Supreme Court. Now, whether they're right in their math, we'll have to wait and see. But they certainly believe so.
Well, this appears to be an emotionally driven case. Does it not seem, if not obvious, Scott, at least evident, that this Alabama abortion law and other aggressive anti-abortion laws, which are being pushed in as many as 20 states across the country, are a direct reaction to what happened in Virginia and especially in New York, where they passed a law allowing abortion right up to the point of birth and in some cases beyond the point of birth? Is this an emotional reaction to the outrage caused by the Virginia and New York laws?
I don't think so, Tim. I think it's a direct reaction to them just simply counting votes on the Supreme Court. Since 1973, when the Roe v. Wade decision was handed down, conservative anti-abortion activists in this country started then trying to get that decision reversed, trying to enact more legal restrictions on abortion, and they've been unceasing in their efforts. And I think this just represents them looking ahead and saying, we think we have the votes now. Let's go ahead on this new front. You know, it's a war they've never stopped fighting. And this is simply a new front that they hope to advance the cause on.
All right, we're going to ask you to read the tea leaves as best you can, Scott. What do you think the chances are that, A, it makes it to the Supreme Court, and B, that the court rules in a way that is, in some sense, favorable to the pro-life movement?
I think that it will see the Supreme Court, if only, Tim, because the number of states that are advancing these laws and passing them, I think will yield what's called a split in the circuits. And that's a type of a situation where the Supreme Court almost always takes the case, which is to say one of the judicial circuits has ruled one way to allow or disallow the bill, and another will split. And so we can't have a situation in the country where people in West Virginia can't get an abortion because the federal court in their jurisdiction says they can't, but people in Florida can. And that's exactly the kind of case the Supreme Court will snap right up. I suspect that's how it'll get to the court. And as to your tea leaf question, as I consult the magic 8 ball here, Tim, I say the court will not overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't think that any of the justices, save, I think Scalia would have if he hadn't passed, and I think Thomas would vote to overturn. But I don't think you're going to get 5 justices on the Supreme Court who are willing to do what the backers of this bill would have us do, which is essentially ban abortion in America.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic here, which is the legalization of mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, in the city of Denver. Now, Colorado, of course, Scott, famously was the first in the country to legalize marijuana for recreational use and sale. What is the significance of them now going beyond marijuana to mushrooms in terms of legalization? Is this likely to set a trend?
Tim, I think it's fascinating. This to me is a huge story because it's the first non-marijuana legalization or decriminalization that we've seen. And just to be clear, the state law controls what's criminal in Denver or not. So it's still a crime, but Denver has said the police department cannot use, and the prosecutor's office cannot use any taxpayer resources to prosecute it. So effectively, they've totally defanged the law within Denver.
Meanwhile, Scott, ride sharing has become all the rage across the country. Alternatives to taxis and buses and public transportation. However, the National Labor Relations Board ruled this week that Uber drivers cannot unionize. Why?
Okay, I think this is a great ruling, and that one way to say it is that they cannot unionize. Another way to say it is that they can't be forced to be a member of a union, because that's what the unions want. They want to come in there and they get a few cooperative drivers who say they want to unionize. And they've argued that Uber should have to basically pay them like employees. And of course, that would destroy Uber. Their business model doesn't allow for them to sort of pay people an hourly wage. And the people who drive for Uber accept those terms. And in fact, many of them like it, Tim, because it allows them flexible schedules and so forth, the sort of new gig economy that we're headed into. And I think of it as not as a restriction on them unionizing, but a restriction on the unions against what they can do for the people.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides, are available on demand anytime, any place at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.